Dark Souls for many is one of the great masterpieces making up the gaming Mount Rushmore, but it seems that every masterpiece needs to have a thorn in its side. A legendary game like Ocarina of Time forces the players through torment in the notorious Water Temple, for which its main designer publicly apologized. Dark Souls certainly has several comparable candidates, and I guess the answer would depend on who's asked. There is, however, one recurring level theme connecting the entire Soulsborne series. A theme which, just like water levels, is generally dreaded by players of all skill levels, whether for their difficulty or their tediousness. I'm talking about the swamp levels, of course. Miyazaki indeed does like his swamps, and it is then no surprise that their variants figure in every single Souls game released, including Bloodborne. The swamp incarnate of the first Dark Souls is the infamous Blighttown. While not broadly hated, it has garnered a reputation of being a brutal, tedious level, especially from the original console days, where besides having to deal with toxic blowout snipers, toxic mosquitoes, a toxic swamp, one also had to deal with toxic frame rates. For speedrunners, navigating this nasty place became a routine, especially when certain speedruns needed to traverse it twice, once in the early game, once in the late game. Yet it still posed an obstacle in the speedrun routing for years, forcing the runners to forego valuable time saves in order to access it quickly. But what if I told you there was a way out of this hell? What if you never needed to carry a moss with you ever again? Well, thanks to cooperation between two communities and their combined genius, there indeed is a way. This is Blighttown Skipping Dark Souls Explained. Before we continue, let me quickly thank the sponsor of today's video, and you've probably heard of them. It's Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is a turn-based fantasy action RPG that is perfect to play on the go or even on your PC. You can use the links in the description to download it on either platform. It has millions of players, a PvE campaign with dozens of tough bosses that Dark Souls fans will absolutely love. It's got a PvP mode, but all of that would be good for nothing if we didn't have the gorgeous champions to battle with. And guess what? They just added an entirely new playable faction. Get ready to meet the Shadowkin. The Shadowkin are shrouded in mystery. Hailing from the furthest reaches of the eastern continent, beyond the Brimstone Path. Are they honorable? Yes. Evil? Not anymore. Are they good? Well, only time will tell. Aren't they badass? Let me show you my favorite one. It's gotta be Yoshi the Drunkard. I mean, just look at the guy. He has style, he has a flow. Right now might be the best moment to join Raid yet, as they've just hit their 2-year anniversary. The schedule is absolutely jam-packed until the middle of April. They've got some huge updates coming later in the month as well, including a Doom Tower rotation with 2 new tough bosses. You might also still be able to get involved in the very first ever clan versus clan tournament and get a chance to compete directly against another clan. If you use the links in the description to download the game or scan my QR code, you'll get your free epic champion Jotun. On top of that, you also get 100,000 silver coins, 50 gems, and 3 ancient shards. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. It's that easy. Just click the link in the description and I'll see you in the game. Onwards with the video. In order to understand why Blighttown is such a nuisance from a speedrunning routing standpoint, we need to look at where it stands in the game's intended progression. Blighttown is a mandatory area and is the only path to Quelaag's domain, and behind it located Lower Bell of Awakening. This bell needs to be rung in order to gain access to the Locked Sands Fortress, and through it the mid-game location of Anolondo. In the latter parts of the game, Blighttown must be traversed again, as under the Quelaag's domain lies Lost Izalith, home of Pet of Chaos, a boss without whose defeat completing the game is impossible. There's always the option of taking the Daughter of Chaos bonfire early and teleporting to it later when the warping power is obtained. But that would mean having to ascend back through Blighttown on the first go, and going up is generally slower than going down. 2 different paths lead to Blighttown. One is the door located in the depths, but that one is unsurprisingly locked, just like the depths themselves. Opening their entrance requires the player to beat Capra Demon, who then drops a key which unlocks a door sited near the boss's arena. I'm sure some of you do have very fond memories of this guy and his 2 friends. The next key required to open the Blighttown doors is then obtained from Gaping Dragon, who resides at the bottom of the depths. This method of entering Blighttown is quite lengthy. Having to defeat 2 bosses and traverse an extra area is no joke. What about the other way then? Well, it doesn't get much better, as the other entrance to Blighttown is through a cave in Valley of Drakes, and getting to the valley is quite the stretch. The player must either run through the entire Undead Burg, defeat Taurus Demon, continue up to Undead Parish, around Blacksmith Andre down to Darkroot, and take the elevator in Darkroot Basing. The cave will then be waiting at the other side of the valley. Another possibility of entering the cave would be to release the seal of New Londo Ruins and drain the water from there. This solution would mean killing Ingward early, and then using his key to turn a lever which opens this massive gate and leads to the Valley of Drakes yet again. Even this option mandates plenty of tasks to be completed before Blighttown can be accessed. That leads us to the last possible pathway to the valley. This little staircase in New Londo Ruins, at the end of which is a simple cage door separating New Londo and the valley, right by the cave to Blighttown. The door, as is customary, can't be opened without a key. This key, which would make the quest of entering Blighttown quickly so much easier, is located in Blighttown, so the door would seem like a dead end as well. Except, when creating a new character, the player is tasked to select a starting gift item. Many of these would be next to useless in a speedrun, with 2 outliers. The Black Fire Bombs, which can be used to kill the first boss, Asylum Demon, during the first encounter, saving close to 13 seconds. Bombs are also often needed in other parts of the run, and having them from the start means saving even more time over obtaining them elsewhere, like in Filing Shrine or from the Merchant in Undead Burg. The second very useful gift for speedrunning is the Master Key. Master Key allows for most locked pathways in Lorgen to be opened early, without having to obtain the actual corresponding key to the particular obstacle. Back to Blighttown. The shortcut door to Valley of Drakes can indeed be opened with the Master Key, and it seems like a no-brainer to select it then. But it is not that simple. While early speedruns of the game utilized this strategy, such as this first recorded world record by Twilight from 2011, the game has developed greatly since those times, and routing has become a lot more complex. Choosing the Master Key allows you to enter Blighttown quicker, but makes you miss out on the aforementioned firebombs. There is a possibility of having both the key and the bombs from the get-go by selecting Thief as the starting class. Thief possesses the Master Key by default, and as such it is not necessary to choose it as a starting gift. The problem is that starting as Thief might have other downsides, such as missing out on the early shortbow of the Hunter class, or the Pyromancer's Flame. Both these items are utilized for game-breaking glitches within contemporary speedruns, and having them early can be of great benefit and even vital to the routing. This is why Blighttown is such a nuisance. It forces the speedrunners to select from different options, each one being suboptimal. Descending through Blighttown is necessary no matter which direction the player enters from. Once at the bottom, the path to Quelag's domain is pretty straightforward, although the swamp inhibits players' movement, making a continued roll spam the quickest option to get there. Fortunately, the cave's descent is quite a bit simpler and quicker than when entering from the depths. The first logical option is dropping around the ladders, which are supposed to be climbed up when exiting Blighttown. This is a relatively casual strategy, but is clearly faster than taking the ladders and can be observed in Twilight's 2011 run. Over the course of time, speedrunners optimized the descent. First, with a better drop around the ladders, from the very top pretty much all the way to the water wheel. And then, when fall damage cancels got discovered. If a player plunge attacks the slope surface, they get put into a special state out of which rolling is possible. If timed correctly, right before hitting the ground, the roll's invincibility frames prevent fall damage from occurring. With these techniques, navigating through Blighttown really doesn't take too much time at all, and so the primary motive to skip this area are the consequential time saves of discarding the Master Key, be it from firebombs or other routing possibilities. Oftentimes, discovering skips, even if not immediately useful in runs, can also help with general knowledge of the game and broaden the spectrum of future strategies. With all that said, the first obvious idea would be to find a way of skipping past the New Londo shortcut door. If, as a bonus, it didn't take too long, it would most likely result in a net time saves over picking the master key. Unfortunately, the geometry around the door isn't very helpful. The space is tight and doesn't offer any openings. Exploiting enemies might push our character through the door, at least visually, but clipping past objects in this way isn't possible. As such, it seems that our only inkling of accessing Blighttown early without the master key doesn't lead anywhere. However, there's no need to throw in the towel just yet. If the first Dark Souls is known for one thing, it is the world structure and its interconnectivity. Only one dimension has been investigated, and as such, it is time to turn to verticality. I will be using a handy modding tool called Map Studio made by Catalystz for demonstration. This is the cave entrance to Blighttown. The descent when plunging goes through here. And then down here, all the way to the swamp. The goal destination of Prologue's domain is in this direction. Here is the tunnel, and here is Prologue herself. When observed from distance, nothing is directly above Blighttown. But notice this, the neighboring New Londo is extremely close to Prologue's domain, albeit many stories higher. If there was a way to somehow drop from New Londo down to the domain, it would bypass not just the shortcut door, but Blighttown itself. That is exactly the thought Immersed Kimp had back in 2016, but it's important to note he didn't possess such a powerful tool as the map viewer. This part of New Londo, however, is out of bounds, so one would think finding a way to even get to this edge would be problematic, disregarding whether dropping down to the domain is possible at all. As long as the ruins are filled with water, the entire area is surrounded by death boxes, which immediately kill the player on contact. Fortunately, there is a spell called Fall Control. It doesn't do much casually, preventing non-lethal fall damage, but in a speedrun, it can play an absolutely vital role as it slightly delays lethal fall damage being dealt to the player. If one quits out before the damage is dealt, the character survives, and the game still stores their position on the bottom, effectively allowing any drop to be survived. It is then obvious that Fall Control could also be used to survive dropping into Prologue's domain, but would it be possible? An out-of-bounds exploit was already used in New Londo ruins, applying the Fall Control quit-out technique. Kimp managed to find a way to navigate around the death plains all the way to the outskirt above the domain. Let's see if a jump can actually reach it. Wait, where the heck is it? So, if done this way, the Blighttown area is not loaded. This is no big problem, however, as we can put it into the load queue with a simple save and quit doing the trick. Alright, panic mitigated, calm down. A jump from the very edge of the platform just barely reaches the domain, but then there was one more problem to solve. How to clip through the domain's ceiling. Never mind, it just doesn't load in time and we clip right through. The real difficult part of the skip is actually timing the quit out. Because we are traveling from one area to another, the confirmation box for exiting out of the game would close right before we hit the ground as it gets overridden by the name of the new location popping up. This forces us to relay the quit out all the way until the ground is hit, and with the domain being invisible, can be quite tricky. It is nevertheless doable consistently with a little bit of practice. The initial Blighttown skip was finally discovered, and it had enormous implications for the All Bosses speedrun. The first world record utilizing this massive sequence break was a 1:13:04 achieved by Kahmul, around 2 months later.
This is so stupid.
Kahmul had to perform the skip twice, once in the early game to ring the bell, and once in the late game to clear Lost Isolate. As monumental of a discovery as it was, there were unfortunately many downsides to it. It required fall control, and all bosses was the only category obtaining the spell at the time. Any route that needed to begin with a master key also wouldn't do the skip, as the relatively long out of bounds section through New Londo made it not save time over just taking the shortcut and descending through Blighttown. However, this is not where the story ends. To our fortune, speedrunners are never at peace and always on the lookout for new strategies. 3 years later, the DS Map Studio by catalystz was released, and honestly, big shoutouts to the modding community for developing these tools that, besides allowing for extensive modding of the game, also enhanced the ability of speedrunners and glitch hunters to find and develop new means of saving time. Using the tool, the runners Capitaine Toanon and Kahmul discovered that this wall outlining New Londo ruins actually has collision on top of it. The wall is interesting because it more or less lines up with the domain as well, and thus was worth exploring. Indeed, it turned out that reaching the domain from the wall was possible in a similar fashion as with the already known skip. The big question was, however, how the heck do we even begin to get up there? The answer, once again, lies in verticality. What is above the wall? The elevator from Firelink Shrine. Now this is where things start to get a little bit technical. Because there is no way to reach the top of the wall down here in New Londo, the idea was to somehow abuse the elevator, but it's just a regular elevator transporting you between Firelink and New Londo. There's no way to exit it, as it's riding up or down, so how could it be of any use? Well, the elevator is actually a connecting piece. While it may not at all seem like the areas of Firelink Shrine and New Londo Ruins neighbor, opposite is true due to the concept of stable and unstable surfaces. When traversing stable surfaces, the game updates and stores the character's position in real time. Meanwhile, on unstable surfaces, it does not. That means if a save and quit is performed on a surface with the unstable property, upon returning back to the game, the player is instead put to the last stored position on a stable surface. Elevators are not considered stable, and as such, the stable surfaces of Firelink Shrine and New Londo Ruins are technically next to each other, even though they are vertically separated. On its own, this information doesn't seem particularly useful, but there are pieces of the puzzle still missing. When returning back into the game after a save and quit, only the last area you visited gets loaded at first. The surrounding areas load in subsequently after a small delay. This is why neighboring areas might be a big deal. One would think that the game determines which area to load first based on the last stored position, but that is not the case. Instead, it uses a separate variable which we might call last area, for the sake of simplicity. Thus, we have two different variables in memory: last player's position variable in coordinates, and a variable of the last area visited by the player. If it was somehow possible to desynchronize these two variables, clipping out of bounds might be a possible outcome. The modder TKGP discovered that this is indeed the case, and in places of area transitions, leaving the game's boundaries can be as easy as a simple quit out. So how does this work? When I previously mentioned that last player's position is stored in real time, Glitch Hunter Andrew of T revealed that's not exactly what happens. Instead, the game has a 4-frame buffer for the stored position. This means that as long as the player is moving, the stored position in memory is always delayed by 4 frames. The last area variable doesn't have this buffer, which in turn allows the two variables to be desynchronized. Here, the player moves over a transition of Undeadburg and the depths areas. Before the save and quit, they move over the transition all the way to the depths. However, as long as they spend 4 or less frames in the depths, those stored positions from there will be saved to the buffer and not used after a quit out. At the same time, the game recognizes the player entering into depths and changes the last area variable accordingly. This makes the game load the depths first, even though the last player's position is still in Undeadburg, and before Berg is loaded properly, the character clips out of bounds. With this knowledge, let's return back to the elevator. Last area and last stored position before entering the top of the elevator are both set in Firelink. The elevator itself doesn't change either variable as it's unstable ground. At the bottom, entering New Londo Ruins for 4 frames or less is necessary. At first, less convenient and slower setups to achieve this were used, such as the Mailbreaker parry, which moves the player forwards and then immediately backwards. Over time, Androv managed to find quicker and more reliable setups. After touching New Londo ruins and standing back on unstable ground, a quit out is performed, and this happens. Alright, so desynchronizing the two variables allows us to technically exit the elevator. That is progress, but the New Londo wall is far from the reach of the elevator. Or is it? Further map exploration showed this little platform leading up to the wall to also have collision, and more importantly, it showed the existence of another narrow seam right next to the elevator shaft and above that platform. Reaching it wasn't easy, but after some time and plenty of trial and error of testing different last stable positions on top of the elevator, the seam was eventually hit. One more problem needed to be solved. How is surviving the imminent fall of the elevator going to be possible? After loading back in, we spawn mid-air, there's no time to perform any actions, fall control cannot be cast, and there's no slope to be plunged. So, is all hope lost? Well, it is time to call Miyazaki and thank him personally, because the mid-air spawn is actually the key to success, believe it or not. Sugoi! Arigatou gozaimasu, Miyazaki-sama! Spawning in the air makes the game utilize the same death animation, which is used when suffering a lethal fall while fall control is active. Because of this, the fall damage isn't inflicted on impact, but is instead delayed, allowing us to effectively perform a fall control quit out without ever casting fall control. Once on the first seam, reaching the lower platform requires a simple fall control quit out. Navigating the top of the wall afterwards is perhaps the hardest part about the skip. Not only can you not see where the ground is, but any small misstep can mean falling back in bounds. When all the pieces are put together, at a time of discovery, the skip looks something like this. This new variant of Blighttown skip saved between 40 to 50 seconds over the original one and was quickly picked up by the old bosses speedrunners. It is unbelievable how everything adds up together to make this possible. But there is one but. Fall control was still necessary. Keeping the any percent and any percent no wrong warp categories disqualified from incorporating this skip. The last step the community needed to complete was escaping fall control's shackles. What had to be figured out was surviving dropping from the first seam onto the platform, and also from the second seam all the way to the domain. In the first case, there's actually more info hiding within the map viewer. A long wall stretching all the way from Valley of Drakes is nearby the location of the first drop, and it is somewhere in the middle between the platform and the seam. Androv managed to find a consistent setup for loading and reaching that wall, through a backstep backroll combination. As areas load and deload, things look very peculiar, but allow surviving the originally lethal fall from the first seam by providing a transitional platform. This is one problem gone, but for the second drop, something major needed to be found. And during Christmas 2019, something major was found indeed. That something is called an air roll, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Yet another way to avoid fall damage in Dark Souls. To explain how air rolling works, we need to talk about weight load first. There are 3 major tiers of rolling depending on how heavily your character is equipped: the fast roll, the medium roll, and the slow roll. To complicate things further, the developers intended for the amount of roll recovery frames to increase smoothly within each tier, as the amount of equipped load increases as well. But because the game is capped at 30 frames per second, it resulted in the creation of 4 sub-tiers in the fast roll tier and 3 sub-tiers in the medium roll tier. For the air roll to work, one must exceed a weight load of greater than but not equal to 25% and stay below roughly 25.000088%. The lowest increment at which a weight load can be manipulated is 0.1%, so in theory it should be impossible to exceed the 25% value without going way above the required threshold. Fortunately, Dark Souls, just like most games, performs its calculations with floating point numbers, which carry certain limitations and result in common values such as 1.2 or 1.3 to not be exact but only approximated. By carefully planning which items to equip for corresponding levels of endurance, the required interval can be entered. At that point, the game recognizes we are within the medium roll tier, but that we also haven't yet reached the first sub-tier. Any potentially existing sub-tier below the first one for some reason lacks a check for whether the character is airborne, allowing for rolls to be chained continuously as long as the player has enough stamina. If timed correctly, the roll's iframes prevent fall damage from being dealt to the character. And with this strategy, 3.5 years since the discovery of the original Blighttown skip, the doors were wide open for multiple categories to finally incorporate this astonishing sequence break. Let's have a look at it being executed with all the modern setups in the any % speedrun category. But hey, it's the first time we are here today, that's cool. Last time I had seen this elevator was like 5 hours ago in practice. Alluring skulls would be pretty interesting as a starting item, I suppose you're not wrong. It is honestly a miracle how everything lined up for this sequence break to work. Transitional clipping to get out of bounds at the elevator, the upper seam being close enough to the elevator shaft to be reached, mid-air spawn delaying fall damage, the lower platform being directly beneath, and the border wall extending just far enough to allow us to fall into Quelaag's domain. It took years, but through concerted effort of speedrunners, glitch hunters, and also modders, we finally have an antidote for the toxic swamp of Blighttown, working within any speedrunning category. I hope this video sheds some light on this, in my opinion, most visually impressive sequence break in all of Dark Souls. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, consider leaving a like, and if you want to catch more similar content, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching and have a great day.